Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've shared a few Betterpress videos recently, and here I'm going to combine some of the press plate techniques that I've used in recent videos. I've been thinking about some of the ones that I've done, and I wonder if a few of them look good combined together. So it'll start making sense if you've seen those other videos as we move along. I'm using the new Cosmos Backdrop Betterpress plate, and I'm going to use the Betterpress ink that comes with the Betterpress letterpress system to ink that plate. I'm just pouncing it and twisting it, and then I got impatient and decided to just kind of do a circular motion and then tap the ink. When you do a circular motion with the ink pad, sometimes it leaves streaks, so I wanted to get those out of there. That's why I was tapping it. I put the clear plate on with my Betterpress cardstock and then run it through my Platinum 6 machine for the pressure. I'm using the Betterpress cardstock with this because it gives really good deep impression, and I'm hoping that's going to help me later. While my plate is on the platform for the Betterpress, I'm using some Ranger Archival cleaner just to clean that ink off so that it is clean for the next time I'm going to use it, and I am going to use it again in this video. So here is the Betterpressed image of all the cardstocks I've used, and you can use many different ones with it. The Betterpress cardstock is just a bit thicker and it leaves a bit of a deeper impression when you're using these plates. I'm going to use the Cosmos Backdrop layer stencil that coordinates with that backdrop plate, and I'm going to stencil the different layers of the flower. Now here is where I've done this technique before, and I've done it with the ink pads that I'm going to use before, but last time I did it with a foiled image of this press plate. Here I'm doing it with the press plate on the Betterpress cardstock. I'm using some black ink first, and I'm using black soot distress ink, but any black dye ink would work. You could use permanent as well. However, the permanent is going to be harder to clean off of your stencil. And because the dye cleans off the stencil really easily, as well as the fact that it works for this technique, I didn't feel any need to use permanent ink. So I'm using a detailed blending brush to start from the center of the flower and kind of flick my way out. I moved on to a thicker brush just to make it a little bit faster. However, that detailed brush is just really helpful when it comes to getting a darker center to those flowers. And I'm going to be using the Cloud9 interference inks. I absolutely love these ink pads because they show up differently on white than they do on black. So I want to have these flowers with the dark center and light outsides, or you could do light outsides and dark center, or dark outsides and light center if you wanted. I wasn't getting quite as much ink as I wanted, so I decided to re-ink my pad, and I figured I'd leave it on here. And you can see how quickly that ink pad soaks up that ink. That's when you know that it really needed it. But it's going to help me get a little bit more ink on this cardstock as I'm moving, and I really want a nice dark center here. By using the detailed blending brush, I can get as precise as I want to, and these ones that I use come in 3 different sizes, so you can pick and choose which size works best for what you're doing. Before I move to the next step, I'm leaving this stencil on because I'm still going to use it, but I'm taking a soft cloth and I'm wiping off any of that excess ink from that stencil. I don't want it to be blending in with this ink, and I don't want to contaminate this pad. So this is a Cloud9 interference pad. The one that I'm using is called Opal Blush. So it goes from blue on the white cardstock to a pink on the black. So when you first do this, you don't necessarily see a lot of the color change. It takes a bit for the ink to dry. And once that ink is dry, you see the color more, as well as the fact that you see that pink, especially when you tip it and tilt it into the light. So these flowers have a second layer here for the other petals, and I'm going to repeat the exact same process. So this layer stencil, there's 5 different layers to it. There's 2 for the flowers, 1 for the center of the flower, and then 2 for the leaves. And they're marked at the bottom left-hand corner of the stencil which order they go in, but you can do them really in any order. The only thing that I would suggest is, if you like to use texture paste with some of your stencils, to use those ones last. And really, with these layer ones, you can only really choose one with texture paste, just because that texture would affect another stencil afterwards. It wouldn't lay quite flat. So typically I'll use texture paste or something that has a little bit of dimension on it with these stencils, because it's a fun part of being able to use these stencils. But I will do that stencil last, and usually I use it for, let's say, the centers of the flowers or whatnot. It's just a fun way to add a little bit of extra dimension. Now these ink pads here, these Cloud9 ink pads, they are pigment and dye blend, and even though you can see a lot of that ink on the stencil, it just rinses right off in under this under running water. You don't need any special cleaner to get it off. So I do put them to the side, and I won't use them again until they're cleaned off, but I love the look of this on those flowers. I think it's really pretty how they have those two-toned effect. So now I'm doing the center of the flowers. I'm going to use another interference ink pad for this. I'm going to use the Regal gray. This one has a gray and a purple, so it goes gray on the white and purple on the black. And I'm going to do exactly the same process. This one I'm doing a lot quicker just because it's the center of the flowers and there's only a few of them, but I'm doing the dark on the outside for a shadow, and then light on the inside, and then putting that ink in there. And I just have a detail brush to put it on here just because it's such a small area. I don't need anything big to do it. Now I label my brushes for these ink pads as to which one I have used with it, because I don't want to contaminate my pads. So I do have one brush per pad. I label it, keep them with those pads so that I can just reuse that over and over again. You could probably clean off these brushes to dry out to use for the next time. But because I love these pads so much and use them regularly, I figured it was worth it just to have a brush for each one of them and label them just so that I can see which brush is for each one. For the leaves, I'm just using some regular distress pads. I've got some bundled sage here as well as peeled paint. The peeled paint is going to go on the shadow part of the leaves. And usually that is the base of the leaf, or where it goes below a flower, or one of the leaves is a little bit twisted. So I'll do a little bit of a dark area there. You could just do one flat color and then make it a little bit darker in some areas. I typically like to use the two colors together. I find that I get a deeper shadow when using the two colors, and it just makes it look a little bit more interesting and a little bit less flat. I'm using the same brush for the two different pads though. The colors are so close to each other that I'm not really worried about getting that lighter color on my darker pad. However, when I go to the second stencil for the leaves, which I'm going to be using the same two colors for, I typically will use my brush on some scrap paper if I'm worried about it. Here, I'm not even going to bother doing that. I'm just going to take my brush right to the pad, because when I was doing the last leaves with the other layer, I was careful to not ink my brush too close to the end and try to get all of the ink off of there. I use these two together so often that if I happen to get some of the darker color on the lighter pad, chances are whatever the next project is, I'm going to be using those two together anyways. And my pads are fairly dry, so there's not a whole lot of ink transferring over at this moment. So the second leaf stencil, exactly the same process as the first leaf stencil, starting with the lighter color, going in with the darker color, doing the shading at the base of the leaves or where the leaves go underneath a petal. Now, once this is done, I'm taking my stencils off. Those can just get rinsed off under the tap. And here we have this beautiful image. And here is where I'm trying to combine some of the techniques. So in some of my last videos, I shared embossing with these Betterpress plates, but I've never done it where I've printed first, then used the stencil, and then tried to match the pattern and emboss it. Now, it was quite hard to try to do this. I thought it was going to be a little bit easier with the Betterpress paper because it gives more of an impression. It is absolutely not perfect, and you can see that once I turn it over, but I still like it. I like the extra pillowiness that you get from embossing this. Now, it would not work to do the inking and embossing at the beginning and then stencil, because of the pillowiness. I wouldn't get a really nice, clean, crisp stencil with this. So when I did this and it wasn't quite perfect, I was wondering whether I could do it the other way, but then came to the conclusion that I wouldn't get a really nice, crisp stencil that you would get on a more flat piece of cardstock. So I will be still thinking about this idea and ways to make it a little bit easier, but you can see that on the bottom right side of there, it is a little bit off. I'm just going to put my sentiment there and I'm still going with it. I'm not really worried about it being totally off. I just like the puffiness that you get from it. And the other thing to possibly do is do it intentionally off and play around with that. So that now that my layers are done and I've trimmed that down a little bit, I'm using some Barely Art glue to glue them together. I'll put my large acrylic block on there just to hold it down while I'm gluing my sentiment. These sentiments are the You Are Everything sentiments. It was the new release this month, and I have several videos using these plates, and my sentiments that I did were from the first video using them. So I'll link that at the end of this video. It'll give you a whole bunch more techniques that you can do with these Betterpress plates, just to give you some more ideas and ways to use them. If you haven't already seen that video, I recommend it, because anytime we have many ways to use a supply, to me that makes the supply a lot more valuable. I'm using some Stickles in the center of the flowers just to give them a little bit of extra sparkle. And then I let that dry, and here's the final result. I love the combination of the different techniques together and the embossed image after it was stenciled. I'm still going to work on it and try to perfect and figure out a foolproof way to do this. And I have an idea in my head. We'll see if that idea works. I really appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for spending your time with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.